you very much. I'm an expert on nothing, but for 30 years I've worked with gang members, so apparently they thought that made me eminently suited to address all of you, so you can take that up with them, I guess. It's the privilege of my life to work at Homeboy and to know thousands and thousands of gang members who have enriched my life, and the day won't ever come when I am more noble or have more courage or I'm closer to God than those folks. They're always teaching me things. There was a homie named Lewis who kind of runs, one of the many homies who run Homeboy when I'm not there, and I'm not there a lot. And he's become quite the public speaker, so he was giving me tips on what he thought elements that went into a successful speech. And he says, you have to pepper your talk with self-deprecating humor. And I said, yeah, no shit. So I feel weird because I know that I've spoken in Baltimore a few times, and YouTube is the bane of my existence, and what's that thing called TED Talks, and I was just in 4 cities in Australia, and everybody had heard me before. I go, how is that possible, because I'd never been there before. So it happens that people have heard me before, and it always kind of undoes me a little bit. I was speaking at this foster grandparent gathering, huge gathering in Southern California. I had spoken at it the summer before. For some reason, they invited me 2 summers in a row, and there I am speaking afterwards. This old woman, this grandmother, foster grandmother, she comes up to me, big tears in her eyes, so I think she probably liked the talk, and she grabbed my hands and she said, I heard you last year. It never gets better. So kind of hoping she misspoke there. I'm not entirely sure. So, a day like this is all about vision. It's about what's your engine about, and you've got all sorts of things, including AMDG up there, and it's about what is it that propels you to show up every day and to do the incredibly noble and important work that you do. The prophet Habakkuk writes, the vision still has its time, presses on to fulfillment, and it will not disappoint. And if it delays, wait for it. But nobody in this room wants to wait for too long, con los brazos cruzados, tapping your feet and staring at your watch and waiting for something to happen. This is already clearly a room full of people who want to make something happen. And I want to suggest some of those things this morning. One of them, a principal thing, is to create a community of kinship such that God, in fact, might recognize it. Saint Ignatius undergirds a lot of the vision of your 3 institutions. Ignatius says, take care to keep always before your eyes first God. And of course, Ignatius has a sense of God, as he writes, the God who's always greater. We've settled for a partial God, a God who's quick to be disappointed, a God who is endlessly frustrated with us, a God who is just eternally shaking his head or wagging his finger. We've settled for that partial God when we're invited to this other God, spacious, oceanic, expansive, the God who loves us without measure and without regret. I'm in 26 different detention facilities where I say Mass as a priest, and juvenile halls and stuff, and the homies are always sort of mangling the English language in a way that I find really helpful, and delightful. And so there I am at a Mass in a gym at a juvenile hall. There are about 300 principally gang members there. And, I'm vested, I'm sitting down, but I have my eyes closed because I want to hear the reading proclaimed, And so I had the little liturgical guide, which is one of these little folietos that kind of resting on my lap and has the readings in it. So I'm listening to this kid, and I think it's the responsorial song, because it's a song. And he gets up there with really an overabundance of confidence, and he says, "The Lord is exhausted." And I go scrambling to the thing, and it's, "The Lord is exalted," you know? And I remember thinking at the time, well, that's way better. We settle for the exalted God who's waiting for us to pay attention and to bow. And I don't know. I don't want to spend eternity with that God. I'm sorry. I'd rather spend eternity with this exhausted God. The one who's too busy loving us to have any time left to be disappointed in us. Or as the old spiritual says, the one who looks beyond our fault and sees our need. Everyone in this room, probably at the end of just about every day, somebody will ask you, how'd the day go? And you go, I'm exhausted. But it's a good tired. You know how that is. It's the good tired that comes from having expended yourself, delighting in people. We least resemble our God, I think, when we're disappointed in ourselves, or disappointed in each other, or disappointed in the students we're privileged to accompany. Disappointment would seem to be the one language God doesn't speak. Too busy, delighting. And that's what we hope for, to move beyond the partial God and arrive at that one. So we all have a vision. It's the thing that keeps you going, and it's important as three distinct institutions connected to a similar and same spirit to reignite that vision. What we hope for is to accomplish what is God's dream come true. Mother Teresa, I think, diagnosed the world's ills correctly when she suggested that the problem in the world is that we've just forgotten that we belong to each other. So how do we stand against forgetting that? How do we align our hearts with the heart of God? And that's kind of key. And so we stand at the margins in our own particular ways, in our own three institutions. We stand at the margins. And here's the thing with standing at the margins. Look under your feet. The margins are getting erased precisely because you chose to stand there. That's how it works. You don't point at the margins and tell others to get their butts over there. You stand at the margins. They get erased because you stood there. And so you imagine with God a circle of compassion, and you imagine nobody standing outside that circle. And to that end, you inch your way out to the edges with the poor and the powerless and the voiceless. You stand with those whose burdens are more than they can bear. You stand with those whose dignity has been denied. You stand with the great privilege, with the easily despised and the readily left out, with the demonized so that the demonizing will stop, and with the disposable so that the day will come when we stop throwing people away. This is what you do for a living every day. For if in the end kinship was our goal, we would no longer be promoting justice. We'd be celebrating. No kinship, no peace. No kinship, no justice. No matter how singularly focused we may well be on those two exceedingly worthy goals, if there is no undergirding sense that we belong to each other, they can't happen. Impossible. And so that's our goal. And so the kids that you're privileged to bump into, like the kids we saw profiled in the films, are just hoping for some notice. Anybody on the margins just wants to be noticed. I had a very earnest 16-year-old gang member stand in front of my desk one day and said, "Look, I need your divided attention." I said, "You are in luck." That is exactly what you'll be getting today. As I'm texting and sending an email, all at the same time. You know, we have a school at Homeboy called Learning Works at Homeboy. And it's a junior high or middle school, I guess you would call it, and a high school. All of them are gang members. All of them are on probation. These aren't hard kids to educate. They're impossible kids to educate. And yet, 35 of them this past May graduated on stage. They always like to say on stage. And I looked at them and I said, "How did this even happen?" And the reason they showed up every day and ultimately graduated was not because, you know, the teachers had replaced a textbook that they previously used, or that they embraced some kind of technique or strategy in the classroom. Only one reason why those 35 kids graduated. The teachers and the staff there loved them, period. It's the only reason they showed up. And I'm not the first person to say that no student can learn something from someone who doesn't like them. And so we imitate the kind of God who we believe in, who is exhausted in a good way by delighting in the person right in front of us. And that's the hope. So the homies have taught me everything of value, and I couldn't be more grateful. And for 30 years, it just enlightened me in ways that my formal education never provided me. And in the last couple of years, they taught me how to text, so I'm really grateful to them. I'm madly texting, and then I realize, oh my God, it's 5 in the morning in LA, oh well. But I'm pretty good at it, very dexterous, LOL and OMG and BTW. And the homies have taught me a new one, OHN, which apparently stands for, oh hell no. And I've been using that one quite a bit lately. So there I am in a car with 2 older vatos, Manuel and Poncho, and these guys tattooed, been to prison, do a variety of things for me, and we're driving to give a talk at a high school, and Manuel's in the front seat, he gets an incoming text, and he reads it to himself, and he chuckles. I said, "What is it?" He goes, "Oh, it's dumb. It's from Snoopy back at the office." Well, I just seen Snoopy. We gave each other a big abrazo as the day began. 300 of our workers gathered in the reception area for what we call the morning meeting. And Snoopy works with Manuel in the clocking room where they clock in hundreds and hundreds of our workers. It's kind of a hard job, actually, because these homies can be attitudinal. And I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. So I said, "Well, what's he say?" He goes, "Oh, hang on, it's really dumb. Hey, dog, it's me, Snoops. Yeah, they got my ass locked up at county jail. They're charging me with being the ugliest vato in America. You have to come down right now, show them they got the wrong guy." But with the 3 of us, we died laughing and almost drove into oncoming traffic, you know. And then I realized that Manuel and Snoopy are enemies. They're from rival gangs. They used to shoot bullets at each other. Now they shoot text messages. And there's a word for that, and the word is kinship. How do we obliterate once and for all the illusion that we're separate? This is the ultimate challenge of your tasks in your particular schools. It's not just graduation. It's not just learn the matter. It's not just know this book and be able to take a test on it. It's about ensuring that there is no daylight that separates us, that there is no us and them, there's just us. All of you, with your students, promote a sense of service, which is which is of course great. But service can never be an end in itself. It's always the starting point. It's where you begin is service. Service is the hallway that leads you to the ballroom. The ballroom is the place of kinship, of connection, of exquisite mutuality, where there is no us and them, there's just us. That is God's dream come true. How do we align ourselves to God's heart in that? One of the great privileges of my life was knowing Cesar Chavez as a friend. And when you were talking to Cesar Chavez, nobody listened better than him. I always found this sort of remarkable. You know, he was never on the lookout for somebody more important than you. You were the only person who existed. He received you with such care and attention. But famously, once a reporter had commented to him, he said, "Wow, these farm workers sure love you." And Cesar just shrugged and said, "The feeling's mutual." And that, of course, is the goal. At Homeboy Industries, I'm not the great healer, and that gang member over there is in need of my exquisite healing. The truth be told, we're all in need of healing. We're all a cry for help. It's one of the things that joins us together as members of the human family. Once I had a PBS reporter finish an interview with me by asking, "Well, how's it feel to have saved thousands and thousands of lives?" And I said, "Well, I don't need to be coy or cute or whatever. I do not know what you're talking about. The only thing I know for sure is that my life is saved every single day. That when I come into the office and I encounter one of the folks who walk through that place, that they rescue me from my own cowardice when I lack the courage. That when I'm absolutely certain of the rightness of my own position, they douse me with a big old bucket of humility. My life is saved every day. I think saving lives is for the Coast Guard. That we're not called to rescue or fix or even transform. I had a very earnest guy, a hardcore gang intervention worker in Houston recently, asked me, "How do you reach them?" I said, "For starters, stop trying to reach them. The only question worth asking is this: can you be reached by them?" It changes everything you're doing. It is the way to empower people on the margins. It is to receive them. 30 years ago, I was privileged to be taught, I have a class with Henry Nouwen at Harvard Divinity. And things were getting more and more simple for him. And somebody asked him about ministry, and he said, "I don't know. Can you just receive people?" And I thought that was abundantly wise. I had a volunteer once come to me, very insistent woman. "I need to volunteer at Homeboy Industries." I said, "Why?" I said, "I believe these people, I have a message these people need to hear," she said. I went, "Yikes. You know, the minute you lose the message, I hope you'll give me a call." So it's not about service provider, service recipient. It's about exquisite mutuality. Find the ways that there is no daylight that separates us. That's the hope. No homie I ever knew found more opportunities through Homeboy Industries than this kid everybody called Dreamer. That was his gang name. I knew him when he was a little mocosita growing up in the projects where I was pastor. He grew up, got into a gang, got into trouble. It was kind of a yo-yo in his early 20s, always in and out of being locked up. But I'd find him a job somewhere in the private sector or through one of our social enterprises. And he'd always sort of come back to me eventually. But he would gravitate to, vague criminality, usually something involving drugs, the sale of or the use of. And then he'd wander back to Homeboy. So this one time they finished a 4-month stretch at a probation violation. He was in jail. And then there he is, and he says what homies often say, this time it'll be different. I go, all right. So with him sitting there, I called a friend of mine who runs a vending machine company. This guy had hired homies in the past. Maybe he'll do it again. And sure enough, he did. Tell him he can start tomorrow. Caesar began the next day. Dreamer was his gang name. Caesar was his real name. Dreamer began his work the next day at the vending machine company. Well, 2 weeks later, there he is again, sitting in front of me. And I go, equally, Madre Santa, here we go again. But this time, he reached into his pocket and he pulled out his very first paycheck. And he says, damn, G, this paycheck makes me feel proper. I mean, my mom, she's proud of me, and my kids, they're not ashamed of me. And you know who I have to thank for this job. And I said, well, that's who? And he looked at me strangely and he said, well, God, of course. Oh, sure, no, that's right, that would be God. You thought I was going to say you. I said, no, gosh, God's number one. Yeah. He said, you are so lucky we're not living in the Genesis days. I'm sorry, in Genesis days? He goes, yeah, because God would have had struck down your ass already by now. Well, we just fell out of our chairs and dissolved in laughter, and I defy you to identify exactly who's the service provider, who's the service recipient. I have no idea. All I know is it's mutual. And that's the goal. And that's God's dream come true. But there's an idea that's taken root in the world. It's at the root of all that's wrong with it. And the idea would be this, that there just might be lives out there that matter less than other lives. How do we stand against that idea? So Homeboy was born 26 years ago, 1988, during the time I was pastor of the poorest parish in the city of Los Angeles, nestled in the middle of 2 public housing projects, Pico Gardens and Aliso Village. At the time, it was the largest grouping of public housing west of the Mississippi. We had 8 gangs at war with each other during that time, which was truly not typical of a public housing project. You usually have one gang controlling the whole thing. But we had 8 gangs at war. So I buried my first young person killed because of the sadness in 1988, and buried my 194th young person about 3 months ago. Not all of them from that community, but I run a really large gang intervention program, so I get asked to do this. So the first thing we did in those days was we started a school, because there were so many junior high, middle school age gang members who had been given the boot from their home school. Nobody wanted them. So they were wreaking havoc in the projects. They were writing on the walls, selling drugs. They were violent. And so I walked out to each one of them in the projects. I asked every single one separately, alone, away from the others, hey, if I found a school that would take you, would you go? And to my surprise, every single one said, yeah. And then I couldn't find a school that would take them, you know, so that kind of forced my hand a little bit. So I went to the convent, which in those days was on the 3rd floor of our elementary school, our parochial school. So the first 2 floors were the school. The entire 3rd floor was the convent. So I gathered all the nuns together in the living room, and I said, hey, would you guys mind, you know, moving out and we can turn the convent into like a, you know, a school for gang members? And they said, sure. Go nuns. I would have no idea where we'd be without them. And so they moved out and gang members moved in. And the gang members came in large numbers to the church, not to Mass, but to the church property. The school was across the street from the church. And so they felt welcomed there. And it was sort of, it created a disconnect a little bit, what I would call a gospel challenge. because our church is supposed to be hermetically sealed. You know, good people in, bad people out. So this was a challenge initially for the people. And then if you listen, which is the whole point, which is not to say I have a message you need to hear, it's to listen, because they'll tell you what they need. And they started to say, if only we had jobs. And so myself and the women, because in the parish we're mainly single mothers, myself and the women, we marched around all of the factories that surrounded the projects, trying to find felony-friendly employers, you know, and that wasn't so forthcoming. So we couldn't wait. And so we tried a lot of things. We had a lot of projects. We built a daycare center. We 60 Minutes did a report, which brought in a lot of money that supported us for a whole year. And we would pay homies to work in factories when we couldn't get anybody to hire them outright. And so by 1992, the demand was so great. So we just had the unrest in the city of Los Angeles after the Rodney King meetings. And so then a movie producer summoned me. And so long story short, he wanted to help. And I said, buy this old abandoned bakery across the street from the church. An 80-year-old building. The guy had just retired, an old Lithuanian baker. And so they had ovens. You know, if it had been an upholstery shop, we would have started Homeboy Upholstery. And so we started Homeboy Bakery. That was the extent of my business plan. And so we had enemy rival gang members from those 8 gangs in hairnets baking bread together. And a month later, we started Homeboy Tortillas in the Grand Central Market in downtown LA. Once we had plural, we came up with the highfalutin Homeboy Industries, as if there was any industry involved in this venture. And not everything worked. I'll be the first to admit it. Homeboy Plumbing really was not hugely successful. Who knew? People didn't want gang members in their homes. I did not see that coming. And nobody ever intends to do anything like this, but we backed our way into becoming the largest gang intervention, rehab, and reentry program in the world. 15,000 folks a year walk through our doors, and just about anything that you could imagine that might be helpful for them, we try to facilitate that. We have about 350 trainees who are part of our 18-month program where they get paid every 2 weeks. But we never want a homie there who's there for the check. We want them to be there for the change. It's a place of transformation. And so we have lots of curricular things, anger management, grief and loss, parenting. We still have a school, of course. We have GPD for the older folks, NAAA, all the recovery stuff. We have a huge mental health team, 5 paid therapists, but 43 volunteer therapists, so everybody's in therapy, doing the work, as we call it. Are you doing the work? You need to do the work. That's how we talk to Homeboy. Especially when the homie acts out, because we know that this isn't behavior, it's a language, and if you don't transform your pain, you'll just keep transmitting it. We have free tattoo removal. No place on the planet Earth removes more tattoos than we do. We have 3 laser machines, a designated clinic, 1 paid physician assistant, but about 37 volunteer doctors, 14,000 laser treatments a year. So some of you are starting to regret that Loyola Blakefield tattoo you have. You'll see me afterwards. It was all started again. If you listen, people will tell you what they need to have done. It all started because of a guy named Frank, a gang member right out of Corcoran State Prison, 2 days out of prison. I never met him before. He's sitting in front of my desk and tattooed on his forehead like a billboard, filling the entire space of his forehead, and pardon my French, it said, "Fuck the world." Filled the whole thing. And he said, "You know, I am having a hard time finding a job." And I said, "Well, Frank, you know, maybe we could put our heads together on this." And I think, where do I send him? You know, to McDonald's, you know, You want fries with that? Mothers clutching their kids, racing out of the store. So I hired him, and he bagged bread for like two years. And then I went in search of a doc who would donate some time, so I found one at White Memorial Hospital, a dermatologist with a laser machine. He gave me 1 hour a month to chip away at Frank's forehead and a few others who had asked. And in no time at all, I had a waiting list of 3,000 gang members from LA County who wanted this, so we couldn't really stay with that arrangement. In parentheses, Frank is a security guard at a movie studio, and there is no trace left of the dumbest/angriest thing he had ever done, proving once and for all that all of us are a whole lot more than the dumbest/angriest things we've ever done. So what else do we have there? So we have case managers, we have, and all our social enterprises. So we have the bakery, which is thriving, Homeboy Silkscreen, which has been around for 20 years and really successful. Homeboy Diner, the only place you can get food in City Hall. We have the Homeboy Cafe and Bakery at LAX at the American Airlines Terminal, if anybody's been there. I appreciate your support. What else do we have? We have farmers markets. We're in about 25 farmers markets where we sell our wares. We have Homeboy merchandise where we sell our logo stuff in our store and online. Oh gosh, we started a new thing called Homeboy Environmental Services. We're basically cleaning sewers or something, storm drains, I think. That has a crew of 40 guys on it, so it's a big business. We have solar panel installation training program, really a successful training program. And Homegirl Cafe, where women with records, young ladies from rival gangs, waitresses with attitude will gladly take your order. And they cater. So, it's kind of a famous place. It's a who's who. If you go there anytime for breakfast or lunch, you're going to run into an elected official, or Jim Carrey was there the other day, the movie star, that was chaos. The entire Dodger team came one day for lunch. It was also chaos. But once Diane Keaton showed up, she of the Academy Award for Annie Hall and Godfather movies, big movie star. She's there with a regular, a guy who's there once a week. And her waitress is Glenda. And Glenda's a homegirl, been there, done that. Huge girl, tattooed, on parole, felon. She does not know who Diane Keaton is. So she's taking her order, and Diane Keaton says, well, what do you recommend? And Glenda rattles off the 3 platillos that she particularly likes, and Diane Keaton says, oh, I'll have that second one. That one sounds good. And for some reason at that moment, something dawns on Glenda. She looks at Diane Keaton, she says, wait a minute. I feel like I know you from somewhere. Like maybe we've met. And Diane Keaton decides to sort of deflect it humbly. Oh gosh, I don't know, I suppose I have one of those faces that people think they've seen before. And then Glenda goes, no, now I know. We were locked up together. Well, when somebody came and told me that story, I just took my breath away. And I don't believe we've had any further Diane Keaton sightings now that I think of it. But suddenly kinship so quickly. Exactly what God had in mind. Oscar-winning actress, attitudinal waitress. Yes, Lord. I still have some more time, but I'll wrap it up. So, kinship, exactly what God had in mind. In fact, Jesus tells us what's on God's mind when he looks at everybody and he says, that you may be one. I suppose he could have been more self-referential. It's not about him. It's about us. It's about our connection to each other. It's the whole goal. That's God's dream come true. That's what God is hoping for. All of us are called to be what Alice Miller, the late great child psychologist, called enlightened witnesses, people who through your kindness and tenderness and focused, attentive love, return people to themselves. I don't think with your students you hold the bar up and ask anybody to measure up. You just show up and you hold the mirror up and you tell people the truth, knowing that your truth is my truth and my truth is a gang member's truth, and it all happens to be the same truth. And here's the truth. You are exactly what God had in mind when God made you. And then you watch people become that truth as they inhabit that truth, and no bullet can pierce it, no four prison walls can keep it out, and death can't touch it because it's huge. But everybody knows here as well that you have to sometimes reach in and dismantle the messages of shame and disgrace that get in the way, that keep folks from seeing their truth. Marcus Borg, the great scripture scholar, says that the principal suffering of the poor throughout history and throughout scripture is shame and disgrace, and I think that's quite right. I invite you to take a leisurely stroll through the Acts of the Apostles, and I suppose you could read it on first glance as a quaint snapshot of life in the earliest Christian community, or you could read it as the measure of health in any community at all. If you read it like that, things will leap off the page. Things like, see how they love one another. That's an excellent measurement, of course. There's nobody needy in this community. A magnificent metric. But my favorite one of all was this. And awe came upon everyone. It would seem that the measure of our health, of our schools, may well reside in our ability to stand in awe at what your kids have to carry, rather than stand in judgment at how they carry it. Some years ago, I was invited to Richmond, Virginia, to give a talk. I thought it was a talk to 600 social workers at this hotel conference room or whatever, ballroom. And I didn't read the thing very carefully until I finally did, and I thought I was just going to do like a keynote. Turns out I'm doing an in-service on gangs from 9 to 5. I am the only speaker. So I quickly got two homies to go with me, Andre, African-American gang member who was at the time working in the bakery, and Jose, a Latino gang member who worked in our substance abuse team. I told him, I said, look, I want you guys to get up and tell your story. Take your time, because we got a long-ass day to fill. And I'd never heard their stories, and Jose got up in kind of an offhanded way, very humble, and he said, well, I guess you could say my mom and me, we didn't get along so good. I think I was 6 when my mom looked at me and she said, why don't you just kill yourself? You're such a burden to me. Well, 600 social workers gasped. And then he said, it sounds way worse in Spanish. Everybody laughed. We needed a laugh. One sentence in, He said, I think I was 9 when my mom drove me to the deepest part of Baja California. She walks me up to an orphanage. She knocks on the door. A guy comes and she says, I found this kid. And she left me there for 90 days until my grandmother could get out of her where she had dumped me. And my grandmother rescued me. My mom beat me every single day of my elementary school years with things you could imagine and a lot of things you couldn't. Every day, my back was bloodied and scarred. In fact, I had to wear 3 t-shirts to school every day. First t-shirt, the blood would seep through. Second t-shirt, you could still see it. Finally, the third t-shirt, you couldn't see any blood. Kids at school, they make fun of me. Hey, fool, it's 100 degrees. Why are you wearing 3 t-shirts? And then he couldn't speak, clearly overwhelmed in the telling of his own story, and he seemed to be staring at a piece of it only he could see. When he could regain his composure, he said through his tears, I wore 3 t-shirts well into my adult years because I was ashamed of my wounds. I didn't want anybody to see them. And now I welcome my wounds. I run my fingers over my scars. My wounds are my friends. After all, how can I help heal the wounded if I don't welcome my own wounds? And awe came upon everyone. And the measure of our compassion lies not in our service of those on the margins, but in our willingness to see ourselves in kinship with them. What you deal with in your educational ventures will often enough run up against some situation or a behavior. And all behavior is a language. What language is this behavior speaking? I was struck by the kid from Cristo Rey who talked about the rage and the anger. It's a language. Can you understand what folks are speaking? You always want to get the diagnosis right. It's something I learned a long time ago working with gang members. Nobody in this room has ever met a healthy treatment plan that was born of a bad diagnosis. I think that's probably impossible. Years ago, I was finally diagnosed with leukemia and went through chemotherapy and have been, in and out of struggling with it. I'm feeling okay at the moment. Or as the homies still say, I hear your cancer's in intermission. Yes, apparently it stepped up to the lobby to buy popcorn, made a line be long. This past summer I had to, around Christmas time, I had to go back into some treatments, and so I had a homie call me from jail to collect, named Jason, and he said, you have to be honest with me. And I said, I will. Are you dying? I said, no, I'm not dying. I thought so. That's what I told this guy. I said, I know G has cancer, but he's getting that shit fixed. And I said, slow down with the medical jargon. It might be hard for me to keep up with you. So, but initially I went to give blood. I always gave blood every year, and because I had the blood that people can use, I guess. And so the guy said, oh, get to a doctor. That's all he said to me. So I went to a doctor, and he said I had mono, so he treated me for a year for mono. I think we can all agree that there might be a difference between leukemia and mononucleosis. So, but a bad diagnosis is not neutral, never. It puts you behind the 8 ball. You lose time. You got to catch up, and so you want to always get the diagnosis right, wherever this is asked of you in the work that you do. But it's particularly helpful with kids who join gangs. Nobody in this room or outside of it has ever met a hopeful kid who joined a gang. If people think only bad kids do, that's a bad diagnosis. So there I am on the Dr. Phil show. I know, what the heck was I thinking? But, and we thought we had talked them down from, doing something crazy. And there I was backstage, and he was going to dedicate the whole hour to Homeboy Industries and promote my book, so how bad can that be? And so I I'd hear him. And now, ladies and gentlemen, the founder and executive director of Homeboy Industries, Father Gregory Boyle. So people are clapping, and I go up, there's kind of bleachers of audience. Then I walk up there, and to my horror, there in the middle of the stage is Dr. Phil on his stool. My empty stool is next to him, awaiting my arrival. On his side of the stage is a gorgeous, beautiful mahogany coffin on one of those four-wheel dolly deals. On my side of the stage is a perfectly reconstructed jail cell with bars and bed and toilet and sink. They went to great expense for these two set pieces. Well, you already know where this is going. So the producers have flown out from various parts of the country, an African-American male, Latino, and a Caucasian kid, all 14, 15, 16, all with their single mothers who were quite distraught, all kids who were gravitating perilously close to gang involvement. And with each kid, one at a time, Phil would sort of grab them figuratively by the lapel and say, "Don't you see where this choice is leading you?" That was a pretty good Phil. Here or here, you know, death or prison. And finally by the third kid, I couldn't take it anymore. And I said, "Phil, how do we break this to you? These kids know this better than we do. They are not awaiting more data. They're not awaiting more information. They know this will lead to death or to prison. They don't care that it will." And that's the key diagnostic moment. For gangs are the places kids go when they've encountered their life as a misery, and who doesn't know by now that misery loves company? It's about a lethal absence of hope. If a kid can't imagine a future for himself, then his present isn't very compelling. And if his present doesn't compel him, then he will not care whether it inflicts harm, and he won't care whether he ducks to get out of harm's way. That's the way it works. Parentheses, as I mentioned, I'm in all these detention facilities where I say Mass, and I was at a probation camp. We have about 20 of them. And so there are about 100 gang members in this gym where I just said Mass. And afterwards, the homies come up and they want to talk, and I'm all vested, and I'm doing the dishes and cleaning up, and they're always asking me for my card. I hand out thousands of my cards every year. And a kid came up and said, "Hey, how do I get your credit card?" I jacked my wallet, I guess. I go, "Oh, this, okay, there, that's easy. Please take one, give me a call." And so afterwards, a kid came up to me, and they're all gathered around. He said, "Hey, I saw you on Oprah." I said, "Well, no, actually I was on Dr. Phil." "Oh." I said, "Yeah, I have a hard time telling those two apart myself." And then a homie over here said, "You were on Dr. Phil? Fighting with your wife?" These guys died laughing over here. I said, "Yeah, but you know, he really gave us good advice, so we're doing much better." I'll tell her you were asking for her. In the end, it's about transforming lives, but you're not the transformers. You participated in this exquisite mutuality. If love is the answer, community is the location, tenderness is the methodology. What was the name of the kid from Cristo Rey? Elijah. It was so abundantly clear what that was, that his life was transformed in community, in a place where people felt the courage of their own tenderness, and it wasn't the textbook that you used, and it wasn't the teaching style that you adopted. All those things are good. It was tenderness that got him to that place. I know from my experience that community trumps gang. The only way that you can illuminate the dark, empty, shallow corners of the gang past is in the light of community. But the methodology is tenderness. It's the most powerful force on earth. It's the thing that brings us to God's dream coming true, which is kinship. I'm going to just tell one last story, but I've been told that you may not leave this place until 10:30 for the coffee break, although feel free to do whatever you want. I will tell you. But I'm going to just tell a story and then open it up to I don't know what, questions, comments, rebuttals, whatever. I'll anticipate a question. People always ask me about enemies working together and how do you break that down? You know, homies will come to me and say, you know, I'm ready, ready, ready. But not everybody who says Lord, Lord, Lord is going to get in, you know. So I'll often say, okay, I have an opening in the bakery, but you'll have to work with X, Y, and Z, and I rattle off the names of rivals, enemies. And they always do the same thing. They think for a long-ass time, and then they go, okay, I'll work with them, I'm not going to talk to them. Which, in the early days, boy, did that bother me. I got all fretful about it. And now, I don't even care. Because I know that it's impossible for human beings to demonize somebody they know. You can't pull that off. Human beings can't sustain it. Richard Rohr says that women work things out face to face, but men work things out shoulder to shoulder, and it's certainly my experience. The homegirls have to kind of duke it out verbally if they are working with an enemy. The guys don't. They're just kneading bread in the bakery and they're not talking. But it dissolves, you know, you can't stay enemies with somebody who is sharing your space and your human experience. So I had a homie who I thought was ready, 19 years old. Everybody called him Youngster. I don't really call gang members by their, well, sometimes I do. If their gang lockout, their nickname is benign, you know, lefty, shorty, youngster. I won't call anybody sniper or psycho, you know. I had a big, huge guy right out of prison, tattooed, huge guy, and he was starting, we were talking in my office, he was starting to leave, and I said, oh, by the way, what do your homies call you? Fluffy. Mr. Fluff. So this kid Youngster, I thought was ready. So I bring him to our Homeboy silkscreen factory. Been around for 20 years. We have like 2,500 customers from across the country. We do high quality work, reasonably priced. We UPS to Baltimore. But I digress. So I bring him there and I'm introducing him to his 30 coworkers, and I watch this kid, little chaparrito, shaking hands. Firm handshake, looking at these guys right in the eye. And there were a lot of rivals, a lot of enemies. And I think to myself, wow, that's great. Until Youngster gets to the last guy who seems to be wanting to avoid this encounter altogether, a kid everybody called Puppet. And when Puppet and Youngster are in each other's vicinity, they mumble something, they stare at their shoes, they don't shake hands. Well, I know they're enemies because I know what gangs they hail from, but we just finished shaking hands with other enemies. I discovered later that this is an animosity and a hatred that's really quite personal and beyond which neither of them think they can really get past. So I sense that much at the moment. And I look at them and say, look, if you guys can't hang working together, let me know. I've got a bunch of people who want this job. Calladitos, they don't say a word. Well, about 6 months later, Puppet is leaving his home to go to a corner store not far from his house to buy something. On the way home, he decides for some reason to take a shortcut, so he dodges into this alley. And because he's taken the detour, suddenly, unexpectedly, he's surrounded by 10 members of a rival gang, 10 against 1. And they beat him badly. And while he's lying on the ground, they will not stop kicking his head until he's lifeless. Somebody finds his body and takes him to White Memorial Hospital, where he's declared effectively brain dead. But it's the policy at the hospital to keep him connected to machines for 48 hours so he can get 2 full days of a flat read with no brain activity, and then the doctors can make it official and sign the death certificate. This allowed family and friends to gather. I was at St. Louis University giving a talk. I flew home immediately. I've seen a lot of horrible things in my life, nothing to compare to the sight of this young man with his head swollen many times its size. It was horrifying. You could barely train your eyes on it. So at the end of the 48-hour period, I, as a priest, said a blessing prayer. I anointed his forehead with oil. We disconnected, and a week later I buried him. But in the first 24 hours, while Papa was lying there beaten in the hospital, I was alone in my office, 8:30 at night, and the phone rang, and it was Youngster from the silk screen. "Hey," he says, "that's messed up about what happened to Puppet." I said, "Yeah, it is." And then with a certain kind of eagerness even, he says, "Is there anything I can do? Can I give him my blood?" And we both fall silent under the weight of it. And then he breaks the silence, choking back his tears, and he says with great deliberation, "He was not my enemy. He was my friend. We worked together." Now, can I say that always happens? Yes, of course it does. Any exceptions? No, not a single one. And it shouldn't surprise us that God's own dream come true for us, that we be one, just happens to be our own deepest longing for ourselves. For it turns out it's mutual. And so in our own particularities, we're all called to stand at the margins, knowing that if we do that, the margins will be erased. For the vision still has its time, presses on to fulfillment, and it will not disappoint. And if it delays, we wait for it.